Welcome to Real Estate Dads, where we talk about the intersection of dadding and real estating. Today we have Dr. Mike McManus with us, who walked away from a career in the top 5% of doctors in his field, in his specialty, top 5% earners, walked away from that to do real estate full time. So we're going to hear a bit of his story and a bit of his life as a dad, a real estate investor, and former, still currently kind of doctor. Looking forward to diving into this. Mike, doctor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it too.
So Dr. McManus, and that's the correct way that's what you go by, right? Dr. McManus?
Yep.
Okay.
That's fine.
So he has a podcast also where he talks to doctors. And do you have just doctors as guests on that, or do you have just industry professionals in general?
Both. So we're trying to make it unique, focusing a little more on retail, industrial, on non-multifamily, since that's kind of where most of the stuff out there is. And on doctors now, there's more doctors doing multifamily, just like everybody else. So we've had a good number of multifamily doctors on, and then to get out of the multifamily space, more non-doctors on in that case.
You know, I gotta say, I'm jealous. My background is 100% multifamily. And I mean, I shouldn't say 100%. I've done a couple other deals with some different product types, but multifamily was what I was I'll call it highly and detail trained in. And the margins just gotten so thin, so some market fluctuations, have some big results for the multifamily industry. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk as casually as we can. We hope you have some stories on the fatherhood side. We're looking forward to hearing it. And I'm sorry, you have 4 kids or 5?
I have 2 kids.
2? I thought I saw on the website that I'm sorry, you were one of, how many were you one of?
I'm one of 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was what I was reading on your profile today, was that you, what your website said you came from humble beginnings. So, I want to hear some of this, and then the transition into being a doctor. And then I want to hear about the difficulties that you kind of described in the medical industry and why you want to get into syndication.
Awesome.
Let's hear it.
All right. So we're ready to go then. I guess the humble beginnings, I don't know if they're as humble as some, but my dad worked for the county, made an okay living, but with 6 kids, there was a lot that it had to cover. So, so growing up was definitely, I think, working class. I never felt like we went without, from like there was some big strain, but we didn't go on vacation. We didn't have fancy stuff, but there were cleats to play football, and there were, those types of things that are important as a kid. But also coming from a working class family, there wasn't a whole lot of background in investing. In building a net worth was not really part of what went on in our family. So that was, interesting. And from that, it was kind of that typical American, go to school, get good grades, and you go to school more, get good grades, and you get a good job out of it. And because of that, you can kind of look at my family and see how everybody followed that pathway. My oldest sister is a lawyer, who now just does legal editing. Next brother's an economist. I'm a doctor, another economist, a soldier who went to West Point, and an accountant. So we all kind of followed that education to get a job pathway rather than any entrepreneurial pathway.
And, that's one thing that I think is common with government employees' kids, is that there's a pension and there's kind of this, my dad was a government employee also. And investing was not educated.
Yeah. And I think, because that's part of what's great about being a government employee is you have a good pension, you have great insurance. And so you show up to work every day until you reach retirement age, and then your income goes down some, but it's pretty predictable. So there's not I got to put this away and be ready and build my own nest egg to pay for retirement.
It's just enough money to keep you around and just enough retirement so that you don't worry about something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad, he worked hard when we were kids. He was always working. I mean, I would say always working. I mean, he was diligent. I'll say it in that sense. But now in his retired life, he's actually doing quite well. He retired with. I mean, I don't even do it in too much detail, but he retired with, I think, almost 100% of what his pay was, and he had mandatory retirement after 25 years. And he went into some other fields, did some other type things to try to figure out how to do, I'll call it, be a business person. And it was hard, kind of trying to figure those things out after having not done them at such a younger phase.
Yeah, it's interesting because I see people who, if you're an entrepreneur in your 20s, when you don't have a lot to lose, you learn a lot of lessons and you become resilient and you kind of blast your way through it. And then when you make that transition, once you have kids, it, you've got these responsibilities and you've got expectations on what your income was. And it just makes it harder to make that type of shift.
There's a lot more to lose.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when did you decide and I'm still going to call it the humble beginnings. At what point did you say, hey, I'm going to go the doctor route? And how did that go from this beginning to where you are now?
It was not a straightforward path. I graduated from high school. I was going to be an engineer. It was you're good at math and science, so you should be an engineer, was kind of the way it went with our high school counselor. So I started in engineering school, wasn't a great fit. Started at the Cardiff School of Mines, which was a great school. Decided to do something different after one semester and transferred up to University of Colorado in Boulder and was doing aerospace engineering. Kind of same thing again, wasn't working. So I did then go to a smaller college and studied business for a semester, but it was, your first semester. So there was nothing spectacular in those classes, but it was really was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and then took some time off and started teaching skiing. So then I went back to school and kind of mixed that with teaching skiing. So it took me about 7 years out of high school to graduate. By that time, had a career in the ski industry, which I really enjoyed. But, then when I decided that, maybe it's time to have a family and I need a better living than this, is when then I kind of looked at all my options, and it kind of came back to that same plan again, that, all right, I need some more school to get the thing. And that's when I decided to go to medical school. And it's interesting looking back, because during my time in the ski industry, I had exposure to some pretty spectacular people in the business world to learn from, that at the time I just didn't see that. I didn't understand what was right in front of me.
I think that's pretty common. You meet these people when you're younger, you don't realize that there's this wealth of information that's right there. Later, you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had.
And a lot of them would love to talk to you about it, but you don't get it. And especially as a ski instructor, you're sitting on the chairlift, just, you're talking all day. And they just kind of reach this point that they're like, yeah, most people don't really want to talk about this. So they don't talk about it, and they talk about whatever, squirrels jumping in trees and stuff that you're seeing from the lift instead of more important things.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to kind of know what's important when you're younger, I think. Even I think about the ignorance. I describe it as ignorance on a personal basis. I don't want to apply that to you. But when I look back and I just look at my 20s and I just go, my God, I just didn't know how much I didn't even know. It was almost even hard to kind of understand the lack of knowledge, I think, on a personal basis.
Oh, I would agree. I look back, some of my friends, acquaintances, the ones who got that at a young age. I have a buddy in Wyoming who, he grew up, his dad was a rancher, a coal miner, a hardworking guy. But after college, he wanted to go into business and sales. And his very first job, maybe it wasn't, I don't know, one of his very first jobs, he got a job working in the oil field, selling supplies. And his boss was an older guy, like in his 70s, and kind of took him under his wing and was like, hey, you want me to show you the way this business works, the way the world works? And he was like, yeah. And he latched on. And he's killed it his whole life, because he decided to learn these lessons at 22 that most of us Most of us walked away from her like, what are you talking about, old man? That probably would have been me.
Do you follow any Jim Rohn?
Yes.
He's got a story that's pretty similar to that, where he's just, he just talks about it. He talks about his first mentor, who really took him under his wing, he was able to learn from. And, and I think that's, I've always, tried to seek out people who are knowledgeable, and it gets harder as you get older, I think, because eventually you kind of become an authority in a sense. You kind of, know a lot of the ins and outs, and you want someone who still knows more than you. And then and once it's people who know more than you, their time becomes very expensive. It's kind of a next level situation. So you went in to medical, you had these people you were meeting, but you didn't recognize the value. And then what was the transition from, and is it a trend? You still are practicing, correct?
I actually, I'll still practice some. I left my practice about a month ago. We went through kind of a period where I didn't want to do the 60-hour-a-week thing anymore. And, and I was trying to back off. And the way our practice was set up, we kind of shared everything evenly. And my partners weren't really interested in changing the structure of the business because they liked this is the way things run. This is the way we do it. It's not broken. Don't fix it. And so we battled a little bit for a couple of years over how that would work. And it finally reached a point where I said, what I want to do in life is different from what you got. It's want. We've got a different, vision of the future right now. So I worked part-time for half a year and exited into May after my youngest daughter graduated from high school.
Great. And now it's full-time, and let's go over what you buy so that the listeners can hear it. What are your product types that you guys focus on?
So we're focused mainly on retail and industrial. We look at some entitlement and repositioning. I've invested with some of I've got a group that we talk every week. So I've invested with them in some entitlement stuff. I'm trying to do one that's a little bit of a repositioning entitlement right now. And it's really looking for value add deals that we can, I guess what I look for is stuff that, cash flows from day one, unless on some entitlement plays, it's more of a all at once. But even on a value add to de-risk it where it's at least a break even, if not a positive cash flow on day one with upside afterwards.
And how many assets do you have under management right now?
We're actually have been liquidating. Personally under management, we're down to just one fourplex we're repositioning right now. And there's just been good selling opportunities and not good buying opportunities. So pretty liquid at the moment.
Well, right now the entire industry is in a flux. Everyone is really kind of, I'll describe it as paddling into the next wave and doing what we kind of know is going to be once the market kind of resets, kind of, stepping back in and buying. But I was going to ask, because I don't know much about retail. I mean, how is the retail industry performing right now?
Retail's been great. Retail's actually at lowest all-time vacancy rates from the data I've seen. Everybody kind of still has this belief that Amazon came along and retail died. Especially, smaller neighborhood retail strip centers are a great asset class. Where you get a lot of these things that you don't have online competition. Your hair salons, nail salons, med spas, coin shops, those types of things. And so that's been a really great place. What I've seen the last year though, still is we're in this transition again where people had an idea in their head what things were worth based upon, 3 to 4% interest rates. And, it doesn't work at 7. And so in the last 6 months, we've put in LOIs on quite a few things, and it seems like it's a lot of guys over 70 who are selling, but they've been, these things that they paid. I mean, we bid on one recently at, where were we at 2.5 million. He wanted 2.9. He bought it in 77 for like $200,000. and, it has repositioned it and kept it up to date. It was a great little, strip mall. But I think for some of these guys, these things are cash flowing because they've got no debt. They've got tenants in them. And even if they're 80% full, they're still seeing an easy cash flow. So they're not feeling a hurry to sell. And so I got an idea, you got a number in your head that you want to get, and that number doesn't work right now.
Generally, that's my biggest issue with brokers who overpromise to certain sellers, especially just to get a listing, where, broker will tell a number a certain price. Maybe it's not realistic. And that owner will take that number to the bank and they will wait forever until they get whatever that number was, irrespective of if it was real. And so it's just been a gripe I've had in the market.
It's funny though. I think we all do it because we're in this process of moving right now and downsizing and selling stuff. And so we have this giant safe, this giant gun safe that we decided we're not going to move it back cross country. We're going to sell it. And my wife talked to the manufacturer and they gave her a number of what it was worth used.
Okay.
And nobody's been interested in it at that point, but you kind of get this locked in. Like, we could sell this thing for $2,500. No, you can't. And then you feel like you lost money when somebody offers you $1,500.
But the manufacturer told me you should buy it for $2,500.
Exactly.
Warren Buffett's got a really good quote, and this does not totally apply here, but his quote is, if you buy a car for $80,000 and the following day someone offers you $50,000, are you upset just because someone gave you a new price? And all it really means is that it was only worth whatever it was to that individual who made that offer. You might end up in a situation if we have more shortages of safes that someone goes, hey, maybe this thing goes up in value. We don't know. So
could be just the absolute wrong time for selling one.
Yeah, for the safe market. But so doctor, in regards to the fatherhood piece, so we've gotten this history, asset center management, deals you look at. What are some of the lessons that you got as a kid that you've taken forward, and what are those that you've applied to your children?
I think the good lessons as a kid were, your standard work hard, perseverance, do the right thing, types of, because those have been the ones that kept me out of trouble. It also, I think, my mom was, maybe overly suspicious, and I get hit with that a little bit, but it also kind of, when I was, when I started investing passively, in multifamily syndications a few years back, I was very suspicious, and I thought at the time I was too suspicious, but in reality, I've had no cash calls over the past 2 years. Everybody's still paying prefs. They're below what were advertised, but, so I guess from that standpoint, those lessons from my parents worked out well. I'd say the ones that didn't is there was, my parents were so conservative with money and took no risk. And because of that, it took me a long time to really get going in this business because, although I liked it, on one side, I loved real estate. I loved the potential of it. And I liked assets that I could touch and see people use. But at the same time, I had some of this real fear of things not going perfectly that I had to work through.
A lot of our parents were Depression era kids. And I think that was kind of part of it. It was saving. My mom's family apparently used to lock the cabinets with a padlock so that the kids couldn't eat unless it was mealtime.
Oh, wow.
And, you hear these stories about people who grew up during the Great Depression or right after. And it was hard. It was a different lifestyle then. And that's my only comment.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you pass those things along. I've been try to be very aware of that with how I interact with my kids and the, scarcity versus abundance mindset. And I think I find myself trying to be a, a safe abundance observer. That, you want to believe in the abundance, but at the same time, it's not a magic thing. And it's nice to, build yourself a fallback cushion and imagine your worst case scenario and play those scenarios out.
Cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. I like that.
Hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in regards to,
Sorry, I might have missed it because I had some internet troubles, but did you mention how old your kids are?
My kids now are 18 and 19. My youngest just finished high school. She turned 18 this month. So actually, I don't have kids anymore. I have adults.
Yeah.
we like having guests who have kids who are a little bit older than ours because we both have 2 kids under 5. Trevor, how old's Gia? She's 4 or she's 5?
She'll be 5 in a few months.
Okay. But we have a lot of expectations of how we think parenting's going to go. And we are constantly kind of checking ourselves going, is it going to be this easy? So, onto the dadding portion of this. What are some of the challenges you've had just with your kid? Whatever you're comfortable sharing, but what are some of the things that you have had to work through? What are some challenges that you've overcome? And what are things that you can give to advice to other guys who are listening, who are going through it?
Yeah, I think, when my kids were really little, I have 2 girls, never imagined that. When I thought of being a parent, I thought of, having boys and doing boy things. And that didn't work out. My youngest one decided she wanted to dance when she was 3. And she pestered us for months about going to ballerina school until we signed her up. And then her sister danced.
My daughter has literally been bugging me about exactly that for the last month or 2. Sorry, guys.
The dance, there's some great lessons in that. The thing about dance when they're little is it's wonderful. As they get older, especially as teenagers, the one caution, I even got this from a friend who is a psychiatrist, and her kids danced, and she was always very aware of the potential body image issues because, you're dressed in tights and standing in front of a mirror all day. And her daughter came back to her in her early 20s and was like, Mom, I still find myself looking at myself in the mirror as if I was a dancer. And she was like, wow, after all that she thought she had done to avoid that, from a psychiatrist standpoint. So, that's why I think the dance was great for them. They learned body control. They learned, movement. They learned to work as a team. But I think it's a great thing for little kids. And then as they get older, there's a lot of pitfalls. And then it starts to get nasty and mean. And, So that was one. My wife finally, when we hit, it was actually COVID. She was like, "We're not dancing anymore. We're going to find when we go back, you're going to find something new." And it was also when they were starting high school, and they were dancing at a studio 20 miles away because it was the best studio. And so they weren't, as they were starting high school, they weren't going to be doing things after school with the kids they went to school with. And I was really concerned about the isolation of that. And we had several conversations and said, all right, you need to find, something at school, and it's going to help you socially. And we had to, we battled with them for a while to get them to buy into it. And then, but they, from dance, they were also musicians. They both play instruments, they sing. And so they had to get over some hurdles of how they viewed people because, you start school and there's the cool kids and the not cool kids, and the music kids weren't cool kids until they finally were like, well, wait, I want to do these things. And so they started doing the school musical and signed up for show choir. And then all of a sudden, these not cool kids, they were like, wait, these are my people. This is awesome. The younger one would have friends when she was in middle school. She would just start singing and dancing randomly. And they're like, Rowan, you're embarrassing us. And then all of a sudden she finds this group of friends and they all do it. She's like, And so that was a big thing, I think, in finding your people and your tribe. It totally changed their outlook on the world. Like, wait, I don't have to be one way. I can be me. And then I just got to go find the people who want to be like me, and we can go be us together.
So your kids, so when you told them, you no longer go to dance studio, find something at school to do, they just went and found similar stuff in school, choir and whatnot, and the same, and actually ended up built like it put them in a better position. It sounds like in retrospect, it was better for them.
Yeah, it worked out well in our, experiment with an N of 2. It came out pretty well for them. So I don't know what the downside of that approach is, but it did work out well. And they tried some other things. Like, it was funny. A lot of things you expect. My wife played soccer growing up, and they both hated soccer. They tried soccer when they were little, hated soccer. We both skied. They didn't like skiing initially, and eventually we won them over to skiing at least. I come from a family of musical idiots, and so it's like I'm like tone deaf. I have no rhythm, and I have 2 musically gifted children, which we found out that my wife's family has more musical talent than she knew. So it all came from her side. And, but sometimes I think that's a hard thing is you have the things you love and you want to introduce your kids to them. And you see like some parents where they go overboard, and they're just so into it. But I think it's this tough thing of trying to share the things you love with them, but also they're different people and they're going to, love their things. And so at least we really tried to expose them to a lot and let them grab onto the things that they like.
We are newly finding out, and again, my son is significantly younger than your daughter's, but he's 2.5, and he often, I want to show him something, just full rejection. And my wife and I both recognize this because it seems like if we suggest anything, it's a bad idea. Like it's almost like we have to just do the thing and almost exclude him, and then hope he then wants to do the thing. And he went with the beach. I took him to the beach this last Saturday morning. We have a boogie board. I was planning on having him just go in the surf. We're talking in a foot deep of water. He said he wanted to go. We get there, meltdown, rejection of the boogie board, rejection of the whole thing. There's other parents there looking at me with my 2.5-year-old going like, what are you doing with him? He clearly doesn't want to be here. And I'm like, he said he did. I swear he wanted to be here before we came. And, but we're, but I guess my point is these are things we're now thinking of in regards to future things, whatever those things are. And we're like, how do we get them involved in some of this stuff and giving him both choice, but also when to kind of push, I think. So how was it when you got them to finally enjoy skiing? Like if that was a struggle at first, how did that switch?
I think it originally when, because at that point my wife was still teaching skiing, and she actually put my daughter in it was like a weekend program all day with a different instructor. And now all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is cool because it's kind of was like her thing. And it was really funny because by the time my wife and I both left the ski industry, we were both clinicians, examiners who trained and certified other instructors. And the girl who taught my daughter to love skiing was a first-year instructor who really had no idea
what she was doing.
But she gave her the love. So
she enjoyed it for that reason.
Yeah, that's what the kind of, we turned the corner with skiing.
Well, that's funny. So, and going back to challenges, and on this show, we always kind of try to find the win stories, the overcoming of the odds. Can you think of anything, either business or family, that you say, hey, this is an experience we went through, and this is how we overcame the crucible event? Do you have anything like that you can think of?
I would have to say a lot of what's gone on recently, because when you were talking about your 2.5-year-old, I was like, he's training you well to be for when he's a teenager, because as teenagers, you feel like they don't listen to a thing you say. They want to defy you, but they watch everything you do. And it was actually when I was going through some burnout at work and, and trying to find a way to keep being a doctor, and was working with a coach, that the coach was like, listen, this is an example setting time. They're watching you. Even if they aren't listening and they act like they're not, they're still watching you. And so watching me go through this process of knowing I had a very well-paying job. We were top 5% earnings per doc in the country for our specialty. And doctors don't quit that easy, and knowing that I wasn't happy, and them seeing me find a way to, give up the high paying job and search for a better life, had an impact that we're starting to see now as they start to leave, that they kind of see the different sides, that, okay, now we see what happened to their lifestyle as dad's paycheck went away. And it's like, we're not broke, but the cash flow isn't what it was. And so they're kind of like, I see where money plays a role. You need stuff. And it stinks being broke. My older daughter worked really hard to kind of become independent after she left home and went to college. And kind of went back and forth with that. And so I think that was one of the, so that they can see, start to chart their course in life of what they really want to do, and understand that there's going to be failures, and, you might have to change course. If you can choose something that helps pay the bills, doctor versus ski instructor, if I could find something in between, that I think those were some of the really big challenges. Probably maybe that's the second biggest challenge. The one that we've come through, at least, was, I think they were a freshman and sophomore in high school during the COVID shutdown. And to take teenage girls and socially isolate them at home was devastating. I mean, they were just an emotional wreck. And they went through depression and anxiety and huge struggles with that. And so that was kind of the big challenge, is getting them through that time. From my standpoint, I never quit working. It might have been because a lot of other practices that were owned by the hospitals got shut down. We were busy the whole time, and might have been one of our best financial years. So it was very different from that standpoint. My wife was the one who took a lot of the brunt of that. But through that they are a decade ahead of me at their age, emotionally, and with the skill set they have. That they went through some counseling, and they've learned how to gauge their emotions and how to not deny, but at the same time not, wallow in being sad, and how to see what's causing some feelings and identify it and take action on it. And, they're like 18 and 19, and they talk about stuff I hadn't even heard about, I think, till I was in my 30s, So I was going through a psych class in medical school, and I was just like, I'm like, wow, the tools they have to overcome adversity, and the way I see them deal with adversity now, they're light years ahead of me. And maybe it was a great thing that they got to go through it while they were at home and had full support, rather than going through some of those hardships when you're a little older and you can't, turn and go cry on mom's shoulder at night. So
What was it? I've heard different stories from, my neighbor kids. They're two boys. One's a senior now, and he was totally cool with it. He was like, yeah, I don't gotta go to school anymore. We just got a computer. Yeah. Make the house, right? He loved it. And, what was it just not being around friends? Obviously, if the kid, your daughter's had a drastically different experience. Was it just the lack of, were they not seeing their friends anymore? Did they not see them after school or after hours on the weekends? What was it?
They did some, but then, how if there were divisions in the world, that time brought them all out. And so there were, some of their best friends had parents who were really concerned and were like, if you get together with your friends, you're going to kill grandma. And so, like they couldn't go see their best friends because their best friends' parents were very concerned. And just the being home alone all day, even they had some times they got together, but they spent most of their time alone. I mean, I think about my freshman year of high school, I was out of the house first thing in the morning and screwing around all day until, whatever time I got home.
Right. Yeah.
Were any of the other kids' parents looking to you as an authority during COVID?
Some,
I mean, I would have been calling you immediately. Let me call my friend the doctor, or his kids are coming over, and his dad's doctor. They must know. That's what I would have said.
Yeah, I think some of it was, I'll have to admit, is I was going against the tide. And I was frustrated with some of my physician counterparts because when I looked at the evidence, at the science, I disagreed with a lot of what we were hearing and was being done from a regulatory standpoint. And a lot of the doctors didn't want to some I realized had really no idea how to evaluate evidence and did all their practice based upon just, protocol. And other ones were employed and they were worried about losing their job. And so it was an interesting impact. And so to be the one who stood up and said, the data stinks and I completely disagree with your interpretation of it. And I'll show you why. I'll walk you through it. It seemed like the people who asked were the ones who kind of at a gut level agreed with me. And the ones who didn't, were in the other camp, didn't ask. And I think that was just a crazy time for all of society of what it did.
It really was. And, and question for you in regards to, your daughters and COVID, how, and, some of these critical processing skills for emotions that you're kind of describing, how are they faring within what I'll kind of describe as, still a relatively tumultuous landscape right now of culture? How are they addressing that?
They're kind of thriving. And I think because they were exposed to so much more in high school and their own emotions, the societal, divisions and all this, that they've really learned they're very sensitive to other people's feelings. And so they're very careful to not step on people's toes unnecessarily. But at the same time, they'll stand up for their own beliefs in an empathetic fashion. There are the older one. She just finished her freshman year at the University of Utah, and when she moved out there, she's like, yeah, she moved out to go skiing and go to school. She's in a business scholars program, ended up with like a 3.8 GPA, took advantage of a bunch of things through that program and had a school trip to New York City at Thanksgiving and went to Paris over Christmas. She's doing a 5-week study abroad in Italy right now and has just really looked at the world as a big place with a lot of things to learn from it. And she found her group of people at school who kind of are on the same page from how they like to live life, from recreation and health and fitness and how they eat and faith and spirituality. And she just went out and found the people that she wanted to surround herself with rather than it being a random thing. And so I was blown away by how she did that. They like having something on Instagram where they, interview roommates and find your roommate. And so they knew so much about each other where they were almost kind of friends before they got there because they'd already spent so much time interacting. And the younger one, she, it was a much more tumultuous high school experience because she was a freshman during COVID. And so they never really bonded like a lot of, you get kids coming from a bunch of middle schools into a big high school. and they kind of mix and match and find new friends and a lot goes on that freshman year. They didn't do that. And so their class really remained kind of fragmented all the way through. So it was, when they started the musical stuff, they kind of found their people and that really helped. But she kind of learned how to chart her own course and, that whole, like, here's the vision of my life. And maybe some of this was me talking to her about stuff I was talking with my coach about that, what's the vision of your life? What's your ideal life look like? And then every decision do you make, does it head towards that ideal life or pull you away, or you're not sure yet? And she's really good at kind of looking at a lot of things that way and going, this is getting me where I want to be, or no, it's not. I mean, she's still teenager, and does teenager things. She's not perfect, but from the big picture, I've been blown away.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So are you in Utah?
So we're in Green Bay, Wisconsin right now still for the next few days. We've spent the last week packing up the house, had some special challenges with that, but and then we'll be in Utah the first week of July.
So what's drawing you to Utah?
My wife and I both grew up in Colorado in the mountains. So a lot of it is that mountain lifestyle, outdoor living. It was through peers from my training that we ended up in Green Bay for work. It's been a great place to practice. Awesome. But as the kids finished school, we were kind of like, what do we want to do every day and where do we want to be? And we kind of said, yeah, I'd like to be back, have that mountain desert lifestyle and talk about a place where you can take advantage of both. Utah's it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Whereabouts in Utah?
We're going to be in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
That decision kind of came from when my wife and older daughter were touring colleges, and my wife lived in Salt Lake in the 90s, and they went there and they both came back. And my daughter was like, absolutely, that's where I'm going to school. She loved the business program. She loved the school. She liked a lot of kids she met. And she's like, man, the mountains are right there. And my wife, looks at me and goes, what do you think about Salt Lake? Because we talked about a lot of stuff. And as I was getting deeper into the real estate world, it was, we'd looked at some other places like Montana and Idaho, and it was kind of like, bigger metro, there's always more opportunity. And so Salt Lake kind of checked all the boxes.
Yeah, it is a big metro. There's often a concern about if you're not a part of the Mormon community, it becomes a little bit harder to do business, particularly in that city. And I've never gone and tried it. I've just heard it a lot. It's so close in proximity to me.
I guess I'll find out. My impression, with the people I've dealt with from a real estate standpoint out there, a lot of them are LDS and some aren't. And we actually had some conversations. My impression is it's less than it used to be. Salt Lake is less than, Salt Lake Metro now is less than 50% LDS. So, there's been a lot of in-migration there. I'll tell you story about moving. So my wife got bids from some of the big, moving companies, they're all included. And the numbers were crazy. It was like $43,000 to move us. I was like, what? So she starts digging in and goes, hey, we can piecemeal this together and do it better. So finds this company called U-Pack, where they just drop off a tractor trailer and you load it. And then we talked to some local moving companies who just do local moves to do the pack and load. And it's like, sweet, this is going to cost a third as much. Well, then the pack and load day comes and the packers come, and they were horrible. I mean, everything breakable would have been broken. After the first day they're here, my wife picks up a couple boxes and she can hear like plates rattling, and she's like, what the heck? So she, starts unpacking stuff, and it's like, she fires them, and this like, we got 5 days to load this truck, and she's like, there's no point. So she fires him, and we're like, all right, let's get busy and let's see. So she calls some friends, and from my kids' activities, basically from the musical, from show choir, and they also played lacrosse. That was a sport they picked up out of nowhere. Who knows where lacrosse came from, but it's a fun sport. But from there, we knew two or three groups of parents who we became pretty good friends with, who were all happened to be LDS, and they're the nicest people. And one of them was like, "Oh, if you need help, give us a call." So my wife calls and says, "We could use some help. We had this issue." They're like, "All right, we'll get some people and we'll come help you. We'll be there tomorrow morning." Well, like 10 people show. And they're all just psyched to be here. And they were all LDS. They brought their missionaries. They were the kindest. And they do this all the time, I guess. You help out. Somebody needs help moving. You show up and you help out. They knew how to pack boxes. They knew how to load a truck. And boom, man, it was like, I'll be eternally grateful. I mean, it was really, I was like, wow, if this is the community I'm moving into in Salt Lake, I'll take it.
It sounds so bad. Yeah, no, it sounds great.
It sounds awesome in the sense that a lot of people want to help. People want to get involved in charities. They want to just do a nice thing for someone. And people don't always have that opportunity. And that's really awesome that you were able to make a call and have 10 people who wanted to be able to assist do that. And then you could even talk about how great it was right now, which is awesome.
So they came twice. They were here. The second group was here. I mean, until it was dark last night. So we're almost done. I just went to bed last night looking at this empty house and going, I can't believe we pulled this off. And I can't believe the people who came and made it happen.
My goodness. So when do you head out? When do you hit the road and come to Salt Lake City?
Probably Saturday, because the house closes on the 1st. So we got to be out.
That's exciting, man. It's like an adventure.
It's new clean start. You get new. Well, tell us more about it. Where are you moving into? Tell us about the house. Tell us about the community.
Yeah. So, the adventure, my wife and I have both kind of always been adventurers, and it's an interesting thing. And I've learned a lot being in the Midwest, because we've known a lot of people here who, they live in the same neighborhood they grew up in. Like their parents, their grandparents were friends with people who their parents were friends, the kids, so it's like this generational friendship. And so, I don't know if we really fit there. And at times maybe I was a little jealous. Like I wish I just wanted to stay in the same place, because sometimes moving's hard. But, obviously I changed schools several times. We've practiced in several locations. And so this is the next big adventure, and we're really excited about it. So we're actually our younger daughter, who had always just talked about going to the University of Minnesota in a program there she liked, after going out and visiting her sister in Utah, and meeting her friends, her attitude started to change. When she first went out there over spring break for her to tour. And I asked her, I go, it doesn't feel like you really want to be here, and you're just trying to make your sister and your mom happy that you're considering it. And she goes, yeah, Dad, I don't know how to tell them. I'm like, that's okay. I could do the tour, and then we'll go do your second tour in Minnesota, and then you can tell them. She's like, okay. So through the week in Utah, her attitude starts to change. And then we come home and they go to Minnesota, and they get halfway through the tour. And she looks at my wife and she goes, Mom, I don't want to go to school here. I want to go to Utah.
So your kids actually moved out, and now you're keeping the whole family pretty in
and now everybody's
proximity.
moving back together again. So I don't know if this is good. I thought it was going to be an empty nester, but it's not working out.
Are they excited about, how do they feel about
they actually are. The older daughter at first was like, I feel like you're following me. I can't start my own life. And then she's like, I miss the dogs. And then she's like, oh, the dogs are moving. So she at first was excited that she could come visit the dogs. But now she's decided that there's more benefits to it. I'm just waiting till when I come home and my fridge is empty. And I'm like, she's been here and raided us again. So the hard part was that if my younger daughter had gone to Minnesota, they have this tuition reciprocity. We would have paid in-state tuition in Minnesota. But she's going to pay out-of-state in Utah until we've been there for a year and been residents because we're not residents yet. So you have to be a resident for a year before you could change your tuition status. So I'm like, I was kind of hoping she'd go to Minnesota. But then she decided she heard all the stories of the dorms. She kind of likes her quiet time. So she's like, I know other places I can meet people. I don't want to live in the dorms. So she's going to live at home, which means I don't get to be an empty nester, but it also means it's like $25,000 that we're not paying for her to live in a dorm room and eat bad food. So that's good. So they're both going to be there. Because of that, we decided to rent because of some of the uncertainties in the real estate market. I think it's reasonably likely we're going to see some residential corrections when you look at the data that I think nationwide, the average income required to purchase a home is like $105,000 a year, and the average income's like 70. I forget the exact numbers, but when you start to see these dislocations is where correction is likely going to see something happen. Maybe it'll just go sideways for a while, but we decided to rent, found a great place, not too far from the university. So it's an easy trip for her. It's got a great view where it sits on the hill. So we'll have this amazing city view with mountains on the other side. I've never had that kind of a view from my bedroom window. So we're pretty excited about the place we're moving into. That'll be fun. The funny part, my wife has this cruiser bike. She's like, yeah, I want to live in town where I can ride my cruiser bike to the store. Well, this thing weighs like 45, 50 pounds. It's all steel. And so from where our house is, yeah, it's a great ride downhill, but there's no way you're getting back to the house on it.
These days, you can just put a battery kit on them and help propel it back up. Yeah, with those big, heavy bikes. But man, I'm excited. It's exciting. It's exciting stuff, man. I'm excited for you.
So let's talk a little bit about some of those economic factors you were just mentioning, and just in regards to this being a real estate podcast. With housing prices and with inflation and with interest rates, what are your thoughts that we're going to see here in the next 24 months out to 48 months?
I don't see interest rates changing a lot unless there's real strong political pressure. We're kind of back to normal. If you look at long-term interest rates, for a mortgage, I think 6.5% is the long-term average. My parents bought their first house in the late 70s and their interest rate was 17%. So I bought my first house at 9 and was psyched to refi at like 7.5. And then we bought a place during residency, which would have been about 2004 at 4.5%. I thought, this is ridiculous. We'll never see that again. Where my current mortgage, the house we're selling, is at like 2.95. So that I might be wrong, but I think we're going to see interest rates stay around where they're at unless there's some sort of economic upheaval that they decide to ease for again. If we get that, I don't think it's going to be a good thing, what we're going to suffer through. I think that low interest rates are bad for the average person. They were great for real estate investors over the past 15 years because it causes asset inflation, and people made a lot of money in real estate as prices climbed up. But for the folks who don't have the financial sophistication to be investing or the means to invest, asset prices, cause dislocations, and we kind of see some of that going on now. So I believe we're in a better place for most people where interest rates are at. The question is what happens as we come through this, post-COVID period where there's a lot of adjustments going on. With that, I think that there will likely be some good buying opportunities coming up. We are in this time where, the majority of the assets are held by baby boomers. And so there's this aging population that is going to be transferring ownership of businesses, of real estate to somebody. And will that happen in the next 2 years or will it be longer? People are living longer. Said I couldn't convince an 81-year-old to sell me his strip mall 2 months ago at a price that worked for me. And so, those are ones that are hard to say, but I think they're demographically, there will be a change in ownership of assets. Whether it's people who are aging and decide to sell, or whether it's, people pass away and there are estate sales. There were a couple, I tried to buy a flex building that the kids were fighting over, after dad died, whether to sell it or keep it, or, and that eventually just kind of, they're still stuck 6 months later. They haven't decided what to do with it. So I think we'll see some of those things where it's going to require a little more creativity and work, or different work than it did the last 5-10 years, when there was a lot of flipping. I mean, it's almost been like house flipping in different assets that, apartment flipping. You buy an apartment, you do some value add, you own it for 3 to 5 years, and you sell it again and make 20%, and then rinse and repeat, and everybody's pretty psyched. And there may be more of that again. There's a lot of indications, we still have a housing shortage. So but most of what we're doing is not in the multifamily space, but it seems like there's some good tailwinds there from that perspective. So I think there's a lot more safety in multifamily buying right now than there was 4 years ago when everybody wanted in. And I felt some of that pressure too, as I was watching people make money, and I'm like, man, I got to get in deeper. And, wish I could be redeploying some of that, over the next 24 months. So I think it's just going to be, it's not going to be just buy everything. It's going to be a little more work to find the right deals. We're kind of getting cranked up to start to try and do a little more direct marketing to retail and industrial owners and say, hey, do you want to sell? And, I think a lot of those on first pitch, they're like, no, but then they start thinking about it and go, oh, maybe I would like to, put that $3 million in the bank and go travel a bunch and not worry about managing it.
There's fear in the market right now. And I see I read articles pretty frequently about how many small businesses are having trouble covering their rent. Biggest one. And for a lot of those older guys, and from what I learned in acquisitions, it was never a one-time thing. And there were deals we used to offer. Still not used to it, but presently we'd offer them. We would follow them for years, just keep in contact with the same guys. And for certain individuals who kind of know that we're right on the cusp of recession, they've got a couple of tenants, maybe didn't make rent, and all of a sudden they're going, hey, I was glad to hear that you said earlier that the occupancy for a retail was as low as it's ever been. I was glad to hear that in regards to the economy not being, bad. But there are definitely locations where, I go and I see that there's, they kind of hide it pretty well these days for some retail spaces. They'll put up some sheeting on the inside of the glass, looks like an ad kind of a thing, but really it's a vacant storefront kind of stuff.
Yeah. I've seen some of the malls have done spectacular job reinventing themselves. I mean, some of the bigger strip malls, there's one in East Green Bay here that 10 years ago, place looked like it was going under, and they've redone the mall. They've split some of the stores up into smaller sources. They've got them rented out. Because they didn't really need as much parking. They've, developed outlots out on the street level that they've now filled with, Noodles and Company and lens crafters and stuff like that. So there's some people doing some really cool things in retail right now.
Great.
So what do you have to say? I mean, I know San Francisco is an example. In Chicago, I've heard, of vacancy among, I don't know if it's retail in particular, but commercial in general. What do you have to say to that? Are you just looking at markets where that's not happening, or is retail separate from that? And
I would say absolutely that different markets. I've kind of made the decision to not invest in markets that I find to be business not friendly.
Which markets are those?
California, Illinois, New York. at the top of that list.
It's funny you say that. The blue states and the blue metros are the ones that are being hit the worst.
Yeah. I think at some point that's going to change. I mean, San Francisco's not going to die.
I lived in San Francisco for 2 years, and the problems that city's had have gotten worse. And it really is a question when you say that, I agree. It can't stay like that forever, but I do question how long, because if you end up with these problems of mass crime, mass infestations of homeless encampments, fentanyl addiction, where you can see it, kind of all over the streets, and you have businesses that aren't making money and they leave, and you already have a city that has a police force that is not necessarily known for cleaning up a lot of those things that keep shoppers away. How is the city going to generate more money to generate a larger police force to stop the issues that would then bring back tenants? And it's a big question. It's a really big question mark of what's going to take to reinvent some of these city centers.
Yeah, I think for smaller investors, I would stay away. I know there have been some large office buildings. There was one, I saw the story in particular that, was, like a 50-story building that was mostly vacant in San Francisco. And that they haven't seen the complete collapse of prices because some very large private equity has been buying these buildings at, 40% discounts. They didn't go to the 70% discount. And I think it's some really big money, from the standpoint that if I was a billionaire and I'm trying to protect my billion and I'm not really worried about, do I get 20% over the next 5 years? Those are good investments. If you've got a 10-year horizon to keep your Rockefeller type legacy wealth alive, I think you're going to have a hard time, when you buy a building like that at a discount, that in 10 years, you're probably going to do great on it. So there's been some of that going on I've seen that in the office space, in some of these locations. So instead of there being a total meltdown, some really big private equity kind of, with very long-term horizons stepping in and saying, we're at a price now that we think 10 years from now, this will be a great deal. Now, if you look at your real estate investing as something that's going to put a roof over your head and food on your table, you may not, that's kind of a tough timeline to work with.
Yeah, definitely. The office market is one that I think is another big head scratcher for a lot of individuals of where the economy goes within those assets. There's been buildings we've looked at where, it's presented as a redevelopment play here, buy this office building and you go in and convert it to multi. And we go, if it was free, it still wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
We see that, and we see that a lot.
I think there's a lot more talk of that than, my question with office is, I've talked to so many business owners or managers in bigger companies who they want people back in the office. They think they collaborate better, they work better, they're more productive. But right now with hiring, they can't get them back in the office because you can't hire. If you tell people you have to come to work, they're like, I'll go work for the guy who can work from home. And so we'll see what happens. But there seems to be, from my experience, a decent amount of interest of people back at the office. So I think office 10 years from now, what'll happen in the next 24 months. I wouldn't bet on it right now unless I do have an associate. They should be closing real soon on a Class A office building in Cincinnati that's like 90% occupied. 70% of them are Class A corporate leases. But they got it at a steal because the people who wanted to sell it wanted it sold. And there's nobody buying office. And so it's going to, cash flow at plus 10% from day one without doing anything to it.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Tell them the tenants, send your checks here. So there are some, that's the interesting thing with office that there are some, and basically they put it on the market without a price, which to me, that used to always be, they're looking for way too much if they're not willing to put a price on it. But seeing some now where they don't put a price on it because they want to sell it and they want to see what somebody will offer. And these ladies, threw a number at them that they thought was, they're like, well, I don't want to own an office building unless I could have it for this. And they threw them an offer and they took it. So, that might be some of the stuff out there too, that it's, a lot of it it makes sense when you see the whole deal come to completion. But on the front side, it makes it really hard to say, what should I be looking for? And I've seen people have some success. Basically, every time they underwrite a deal, they make an offer. They make an offer at what the building's worth to them. And the vast majority, you offend a broker, they laugh, or you're like, hey man, don't be offended, but do you want an offer? I can give you one of what it's worth to me. And they get some success. And so they figure, well, if I did the work to underwrite it, I'll make an offer. So
yeah,
love that approach.
Yeah, that's the best advice on people who are squeamish about writing an offer. Just write it, let them make the decision. And there's a lot of variations in who thinks, as we mentioned earlier, who thinks what's worth what. Appraiser thinks it's worth one thing. The lender thinks it's worth one thing. The actual, even the insurance company thinks it's worth something else. And then it's what the buyer thinks it's worth and what the broker thinks it's worth and what the seller thinks it's worth, and it really comes down to what it closes escrow for. That's the reality of it. All of the pricing out there, it's whatever it closes for, meaning whatever the seller took at that moment.
Yeah. I actually, right before we got on the show, because this broker called me and I had to be like, man, I got to go. I got 1 minute. I got a meeting. But it was an office deal that we first discussed over a year ago, when the guy wanted to sell it. And we he was willing to do some creative stuff and none of it really got to where it worked. We finally said no. They did some more lease up, came back, looked at it again, said no. And each time it comes back, it's a little better deal. It's a little more leased up. The prices come down. We might get to it. So we're going to talk Monday and see if we're breathing life back into this thing again, or we're still kicking the same dead horse.
Just offer what it's worth and drop the price.
Yeah. So we'll see. He's been working hard to lease it up. And I said, well, if you can lease it up to the point where it's break even and there's room for upside, we'll talk. But I'm not going to buy office right now that I need to lease to make money. So, so we'll see.
And we should have asked this before. So with people who want to get in contact with you, what's your ask for listeners? Are you looking for investors? Do you have people who you'd like to contact you?
Yeah. If you're looking to invest in retail, industrial type deals, give us a call. We've got a lot that seems to be on the verge of happening. No active deals right now. I've had a few people talking to me about, there's a lot of doctors out there who aren't very happy right now and feel stuck. And so even any docs that just want to talk about what it takes to make a transition and not feel stuck and crushed by your career, would love to talk to them and kind of see more what their specific needs are to feel like they can either change the way they practice medicine or feel like there's actually hope they can do something different.
And how do they get in contact with you?
Probably the easiest way is to go to our website. It's thefortresscapital.com. And there's in there you can just schedule a call. You could also go to our podcast website, surgeonsyndicate.com, and you can schedule a call from there too.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thanks so much for the wisdom and the advice, and we hope that listeners reach out to you. You're proven to be a vast wealth of knowledge on many topics: parenting, medical, and real estate. So we're so thankful for having you.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.